The boy's legs burned as he ran, but he didn't dare slow down. His arms, trembling from exhaustion, cradled the tiny, pale baby against his chest. The child wasn't moving. His heart pounded, not just from the running but from fear, pure, gut-wrenching fear. "Somebody help," he screamed, but the street was full of people who only stared. Some gasped. Others whispered. A few even stepped away. He knew what they were thinking. A black kid sprinting down the street with a white baby? It didn't look good. But he didn't have time to explain. The hospital was just ahead. He pushed harder, his lungs burning, his vision blurring from the sweat in his eyes. Then, finally, he reached the entrance. He burst through the automatic doors, nearly slipping on the polished floor. Nurses and patients turned, their faces filled with shock. "Please," he shouted, gasping for air. "The baby, he's not breathing." For a second, no one moved. Then, out of nowhere, a doctor rushed forward. He was tall, his white coat flaring as he ran. He didn't hesitate. He snatched the child from the boy's arms and held him carefully, his experienced hands immediately checking for signs of life. The boy stood frozen, watching, waiting. Then, he saw it, the doctor's face changed. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly, and his breathing hitched. Something was wrong. Something more than just the baby's condition. The doctor turned sharply to a nearby nurse. "Get me a crash cart. Now!" The hospital burst into motion. Nurses scrambled, equipment rolled in, but the doctor just stood there, staring at the baby like he had just seen a ghost. Tears filled his eyes. His hands trembled. And then, in the middle of the chaos, he whispered something under his breath. Something the boy barely heard, but it made his stomach drop. He had whispered, "It can't be." The doctor stood frozen, cradling the motionless baby in his arms. His fingers trembled as he pressed 2 fingers to the tiny chest, feeling for any sign of life. The moment stretched unbearably long, the hospital noise fading into a low hum around him. Then, the baby made the faintest, shallowest gasp. The doctor snapped back to reality. "We need oxygen, now," he barked, his voice sharp with urgency. A nurse rushed forward with a tiny oxygen mask, securing it over the baby's pale lips. Another nurse checked the monitors, shaking her head. "Heart rate is weak. We're losing him." The doctor worked fast, too fast for the boy to understand what was happening. He stood there, chest still heaving from the run, eyes darting from the baby to the doctor's face. Then he noticed something. Tears. The doctor had tears in his eyes. Something was wrong, something more than just the baby's condition. The way the doctor looked at the child wasn't just medical concern. It was something deeper. "Is he gonna be okay?" the boy asked, his voice shaking. No one answered. A nurse turned to him instead. "Who are you? Where did you get this baby?" Her voice was sharp, suspicious. The boy's stomach clenched. He knew this would happen. He knew what it looked like. I found him," he stammered. "He was just lying there, in the alley. I didn't know what to do, so I ran." The nurse frowned. "Alley?" The doctor finally snapped his head up. His eyes locked onto the boy's with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. "Where exactly?" the doctor asked, his voice oddly strained. "Behind the old corner store on Maple," the boy answered. "I heard something, and when I went to check, he was just there. Wrapped in a blanket. Alone." The doctor took a sharp breath, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the baby tighter. Then, without another word, he spun toward the nearest nurse. "Get a full scan done now. I need to confirm something." The boy frowned. "Confirm what?" The doctor didn't answer. Instead, he whispered something again under his breath, almost like he was talking to himself. It really can't be. Then, just as suddenly, he turned to a security guard standing near the entrance. Lock down the hospital. The boy's heart dropped. Wait, what? Why? The doctor ignored him. No one leaves. Not until I say so. The nurses exchanged worried glances, but no one questioned him. The guard nodded and reached for his radio. The hospital doors locked with a loud clunk. The boy suddenly felt trapped. He swallowed hard. What's going on? The doctor finally turned back to him. His eyes, still filled with tears, looked as if they held 1,000 unspoken words. Instead, he only said one thing. That baby was never supposed to be found. The boy's heart pounded in his chest as the doctor's words echoed in his mind. That baby was never supposed to be found. The air in the hospital felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Nurses moved quickly around the baby, hooking up wires, adjusting monitors, working with precision. But the doctor just stood there, staring at the child like he had seen a ghost. The boy's throat was dry. He forced himself to speak. What do you mean? What's wrong with the baby? The doctor blinked, as if snapping out of a trance. His eyes, still glossy with emotion, flicked to the boy. You said you found him in an alley? The boy nodded. Yeah, wrapped in a blanket. Like someone left him there. The doctor clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the edge of the hospital bed. No. That's impossible. The boy's pulse quickened. Why? The doctor hesitated. His gaze flickered toward the security guard standing at the entrance, then back to the baby. He took a deep breath, like he was debating whether to say something. Then, finally, he spoke. Because this baby. He swallowed hard. This baby died 3 days ago. The boy felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. What? The doctor nodded, his face pale. I was here when it happened. I filled out the paperwork myself. The boy took a step back, his legs suddenly weak. But, he's here. He's alive. The doctor looked down at the baby, still pale, still barely breathing. That's what I don't understand, he muttered. The nurses glanced at each other, confusion and unease in their expressions. One of them spoke up. Doctor, should we check the records? He nodded. Yes. I need to see them now. The nurse rushed out of the room. The boy gripped the edge of the bed, his mind racing. Are you saying, this baby came back to life? The doctor didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the small child, as if he were searching for something, some kind of answer. Then, just as the silence became unbearable, the baby twitched. The heart monitor beeped louder. The doctor and nurses jumped into action, adjusting the wires, checking the baby's vitals. But the boy didn't move. He watched as the child's tiny fingers curled slightly. Then, slowly, the baby's eyes fluttered open. The room went completely still. The baby's eyes, bright, almost glowing, stared directly at the doctor. And for the first time in his entire career, the doctor took a step back, his face drained of color. The boy saw his lips move. But this time, he didn't whisper. This time, he said it clearly. This is not possible. The room stood frozen in time. The baby, barely clinging to life moments ago, was now awake. Its tiny eyes, strikingly bright, almost unnatural, locked onto the doctor with an intensity that sent a chill down the boy's spine. The doctor took another step back, his breathing unsteady. This is not possible, he whispered again, his voice hollow. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The beeping of the heart monitor quickened, not from distress, but as if something inside the baby was changing. The boy swallowed hard. Doc, what's happening? The doctor's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked down at the baby, then back at the boy. Then, suddenly, the nurse who had left to check the records rushed back in, her face pale. She held a file in her shaking hands. "Doctor. I checked. The records are real," she said, her voice trembling. The doctor snatched the file from her hands, flipping through the pages. His eyes scanned the documents rapidly, his face growing grimmer with each second. The boy caught a glimpse of the papers. One page stood out. Infant male. Declared deceased, 11:43 p.m., 3 days ago. There was no doubt about it. The baby in the hospital bed was supposed to be dead. But how? The nurse whispered. How is he here? The doctor exhaled sharply, gripping the file tighter. I don't know. But something's wrong. Very wrong. The boy's pulse pounded in his ears. I told you, I found him in the alley. Alone. Like someone left him there. The doctor turned to him, his expression unreadable. And you're sure, no one else was there? The boy hesitated. He wanted to say yes. But now that he thought about it, something had felt off. The alley had been quiet, too quiet. And then there was that strange feeling, like someone was watching him. I don't know, he admitted. I didn't see anyone, but... The doctor's jaw tightened. Then someone wanted you to find him. The boy shivered. The idea sent a chill through him. Doctor, what do we do? The nurse asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor didn't answer. He was staring at the baby again. The child, still impossibly alert, was looking right at him, as if he understood what was happening. Then the baby did something no one expected. He smiled. Not the innocent, reflexive smile of a newborn. This was different. Deliberate. And that's when the lights in the hospital flickered. The heart monitor let out a sharp beep, the reading spiking for just a second before stabilizing. The machines hummed louder, as if reacting to something unseen. A gust of cold air swept through the room. The doctor's entire body stiffened. No. The boy felt his stomach tighten. What? What is it? The doctor turned to him, his face pale. His next words made the boy's blood run cold. This baby, he's not just alive. He swallowed hard. He's not human. The doctor's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. He's not human. The boy's breath hitched. What do you mean? The baby was right there, small, fragile, wrapped in hospital blankets. He looked human. But those eyes, they didn't belong to any normal infant. The doctor swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he checked the baby's pulse again. His fingers pressed against the tiny wrist. He frowned. The boy stepped closer. What is it now? The doctor hesitated. Then he took the boy's hand and placed it on the baby's wrist. Feel for yourself. The boy's fingers touched the baby's skin. Nothing. No pulse. His heart nearly stopped. He's not breathing. The nurses gasped, checking the monitors. But the machines still showed a steady heartbeat. The boy's mind reeled. How can a baby be alive, without a pulse? Without breathing? The doctor's voice was grim. That's exactly why I said, he's not human. The nurse, still clutching the baby's records, spoke up, her voice shaking. Doctor, what if this isn't a mistake? What if this baby really died 3 days ago? The boy's skin prickled. But I found him alive. The doctor looked at the baby again. Or maybe, something brought him back. The words sent a shiver down the boy's spine. The doctor turned sharply to the nurse. Close the blinds. Lock the door. Nobody else comes in here. She hesitated but obeyed. The room dimmed as the blinds snapped shut. The heavy click of the door locking sent a strange finality through the air. "Why are we locking the door?" the boy asked. The doctor's eyes were dark with something the boy had never seen before: fear. "Because if someone left this baby in an alley for you to find, then maybe they're watching us right now." The air in the room suddenly felt heavier. The machines beeped softly, the only sound in the tense silence. Then, from somewhere outside the room, there was a noise. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap against the hospital window. The boy's stomach dropped. The hospital room was on the 3rd floor. Everyone in the room froze. The doctor clenched his fists. Nobody move. The boy's hands were ice cold. He turned his head just slightly toward the window. The tapping came again. Tap, tap, tap. The boy's throat tightened. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Then, from the hospital hallway, a sound cut through the air. A voice. Low. Raspy. "You have something that does not belong to you." The lights flickered violently. The baby let out a small, breathy giggle. And the doctor, for the first time in his career, looked truly terrified. The air in the hospital room turned ice cold. "You have something that does not belong to you." The voice had come from just beyond the door. Deep. Raspy. Unnatural. The doctor grabbed the boy's arm, pulling him back toward the hospital bed. The nurses stood frozen, their eyes wide with fear. The baby, still wrapped in blankets, let out another soft giggle, eerily calm, as if completely unaffected by the tension in the room. The boy swallowed hard. Who was that?" The doctor didn't answer. He motioned for everyone to stay silent, then took slow steps toward the door. The hallway outside was quiet. Too quiet. Then. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of fingernails, or something sharper, dragged along the door. The boy shuddered. "That's not normal." The doctor pressed a finger to his lips. Then, with careful precision, he leaned forward and peeked through the small window in the door. His entire body went rigid. The boy saw the color drain from the doctor's face. The nurse took a step forward. "Doctor," she whispered. The doctor staggered back from the door, his breath shaky. "It's not human," he muttered under his breath. The boy's stomach turned. "What do you mean?" The doctor just shook his head. "We can't let it in." Then. Slam. Something heavy hit the door. Hard. The nurses gasped. The boy stumbled back. Another slam. Then another. The door rattled under the force. "Doctor, what do we do?" one of the nurses whispered in panic. The doctor didn't respond immediately. His eyes darted to the baby, then to the locked door. His mind was racing. Then the voice came again, this time, lower. More insistent. "That child is not yours." The boy felt the hairs on his arms rise. The baby suddenly moved in the doctor's arms, turning its small head toward the door. Then. The lights in the hospital room flickered violently, buzzing with unstable energy. The machines beeped erratically. The air thickened, pressing down on them. And then, for the first time, the baby spoke. Not in babbling noises. Not in innocent coos. But in a voice that was clear. And far too mature for a newborn. "Leave us." The boy's blood ran cold. The doctor stiffened. The nurses gasped. And then, silence. The knocking stopped. The flickering lights steadied. The air cleared. The boy's chest rose and fell rapidly. He turned toward the door, barely able to breathe. Whoever, or whatever, had been outside was gone. The doctor let out a slow, shaking breath. His grip on the baby tightened. "What What just happened? The boy whispered. The doctor didn't respond. He just looked down at the baby. And for the first time, he realized something terrifying. This baby wasn't just different. It wasn't just alive when it shouldn't be. It had power. Power beyond anything they understood. And something, was trying to take it back. The silence in the hospital room was suffocating. The boy, the doctor, and the nurses stood frozen, their eyes locked on the tiny infant lying in the doctor's arms. The baby had just spoken. Not in a childish murmur. Not in a confused babble. A real voice. Clear. Commanding. Unnatural. Leave us. And whatever had been outside, obeyed. The doctor's hands trembled as he clutched the baby tighter. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The boy, still breathless, stepped closer. Doctor. His voice was barely above a whisper. What just happened? The doctor swallowed hard. I don't know. The nurses exchanged terrified glances. One of them edged toward the door as if she was ready to flee. We need to call security, she said. The doctor shook his head sharply. No. The nurse blinked. But. The doctor turned, his face pale. Do you really think security can handle that? He gestured toward the door that something not human had been trying to break down just moments ago. The nurse fell silent. The boy stared at the baby, his mind spinning. The baby was still small, still fragile-looking. But there was something off about him. Something powerful, something ancient, hidden behind those innocent eyes. The baby's tiny fingers curled around the doctor's coat. Then, just as naturally as breathing, the baby smiled. A strange warmth filled the room. The flickering light steadied. The cold air dissipated. It was as if the baby had pressed an invisible reset button on reality itself. The boy's breath hitched. The baby turned his head and looked directly at him. The boy stiffened. He felt something in his chest, a warmth spreading outward, like a silent wave of understanding. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, the baby spoke again. You saved me. The boy gasped. The doctor's mouth fell open. One of the nurses took a step back, nearly knocking over a tray. The baby remembered. The boy's hands clenched into fists. How do you know? The baby blinked. His lips parted slightly, as if searching for the right words. Then. Because I was never supposed to be found. The boy's breath caught in his throat. The doctor's hands tightened around the baby. What do you mean? The baby's small chest rose and fell with a slow breath. They left me to disappear, he whispered. But you changed that. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurses. Then, turning back to the baby, he spoke carefully. Who are you? The baby's lips curled into a faint, almost knowing smile. I don't remember. The boy's stomach twisted. Was the baby lying? Or did he truly not know? Then the doctor's voice turned grim. Who was outside the door just now? The baby's expression darkened. His small fingers gripped the doctor's sleeve, his tiny knuckles turning white. They are the ones who lost me. A cold shiver ran down the boy's spine. Before anyone could respond, a loud beep from one of the machines shattered the silence. The doctor snapped his head toward the monitor. His pulse spiked. One of the heart rate graphs was changing. No, not just changing. Rewriting itself. The numbers flickered, the waveform distorting into strange patterns that looked nothing like a human heartbeat. The doctor's voice dropped to a whisper. This baby, he's not just different. The boy swallowed. Then what is he? The doctor exhaled sharply. I think, he's something we've never seen before. Then. A sudden gust of air rushed through the room, though no windows were open. The hospital lights flickered again. And from outside the locked door, a new voice spoke. Not raspy. Not low. But smooth. Confident. And terrifyingly calm. Give him to us. Now. The doctor turned to the boy, his expression firm. We run. The doctor's hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the baby, who was now stabilized, but the battle wasn't over yet. His mind raced, remembering his past decisions that had brought him to this very moment. Years ago, he had chosen to abandon a project that promised to change the world, but it had also cost lives. The weight of that choice had haunted him, a shadow that followed him through every shift, every patient, every failure. But today, he found himself at the crossroads of redemption, staring into the small face of a child who could be the answer to his years of guilt. The black kid stood beside him, silent but unwavering, his eyes fixed on the baby. The doctor glanced at the kid, recognizing the intensity of his gaze. The kid wasn't just a bystander in this story, he was a participant in something much larger than either of them understood. And in that moment, the doctor realized that saving the baby wasn't just about fixing a medical condition, it was about righting the wrongs of his past. As the team continued their work, the doctor could feel the weight of the kid's presence beside him. The kid's fierce determination to protect the baby mirrored the doctor's younger self, naive, driven by a desire to fix everything, to make things right. But the doctor knew that it wasn't that simple anymore. The choices he had made had consequences, and some things couldn't be undone. But maybe, just maybe, he could do something now that would make up for the past. He turned to the kid, his voice soft but firm. You're doing the right thing, he said, his eyes meeting the kid's. No matter how hard this gets, you're saving this child's life. You're not just fighting for her, you're fighting for the future. And that's something we all need to remember. The kid nodded, though he didn't speak. He had been silent for most of the day, his focus entirely on the baby and what they needed to do to ensure her survival. But now, the weight of the doctor's words sank in. This wasn't just about him and the baby anymore. It was about everyone. The future, the mistakes of the past, and the redemption they all so desperately needed. The baby's heart rate was steady now, but the doctor knew they were still far from out of danger. There was a long road ahead, treatments, tests, recovery, but this was the first step. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the beginning of something new. A chance to rewrite their stories. Outside the sterile walls of the hospital, the world carried on, unaware of the life-or-death struggle unfolding within. But within these walls, something had shifted. The doctor had found a piece of himself that had been missing for years. And in the quiet courage of the kid, he saw the possibility of redemption, of making up for the choices that had once seemed too far gone to fix. The doctor made his way to the observation window, looking down at the kid as he stood over the baby's incubator, his expression unreadable. The doctor had made a choice. He had put aside his fear, his guilt, and his shame to do what was right. And though the future was uncertain, he knew he had made a difference. That was enough. For the first time in a long while, the doctor allowed himself to feel hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this baby's survival wasn't just about saving one life, it was about saving them all. He turned back to the kid, who was still standing at the window, and gave him a small nod. The kid's gaze never left the baby, but he gave a slight nod in return. The doctor's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sadness. The kid had come to him, desperate, hoping to save someone he loved. But in doing so, he had saved them all, from the past, from the mistakes that could never be undone, from the guilt that had once threatened to consume the doctor. There were still difficult days ahead, difficult decisions to be made, but the doctor knew that, for the first time in years, he was on the right path. His redemption had begun, not with a grand gesture or an apology, but with the simple act of choosing to do what was right, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty. He looked at the baby one last time before turning away. The kid's journey wasn't over, and neither was his. They would both have to face their pasts in the coming days. But today, they had won. Today, they had taken the first step toward healing. And that, the doctor thought, was all anyone could ever ask for. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also a strange sense of peace that the doctor hadn't felt in years. The baby, though still fragile, continued to improve. Every moment was a victory, but also a reminder of the cost it had taken to get to this point. The doctor's shifts became a blur, filled with medical procedures, tests, and long nights spent monitoring the baby's condition. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered: was this enough to atone for the mistakes he had made in the past? The black kid, who had once seemed so desperate, now appeared to carry an air of quiet strength. He had stayed by the baby's side, just as he promised, never leaving for more than a few minutes at a time. His dedication to the child became something everyone in the hospital admired. But there was more to the kid than the doctor had first realized. Over time, the doctor learned that the kid had lost his own mother when he was just a toddler, an event that had shaped the person he had become. It was clear now that the kid saw something in this baby, something that connected their lives in a way neither of them could explain. One afternoon, as the kid sat by the baby's incubator, the doctor walked in, carrying a folder full of test results. He stopped for a moment to watch the kid. There was something almost fatherly in the way the kid looked at the baby, protective, loving, unwavering. The doctor felt a sense of admiration for him. The kid had faced hardships that no child should have to endure, but instead of breaking, he had forged a strength that many adults would envy. "I need to talk to you about something," the doctor said, breaking the silence. The kid didn't turn immediately, but after a few moments, he stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving the baby. He nodded, signaling that he was ready. The test results came in, the doctor continued, walking over to the incubator. "The baby's doing better, but there's still a long road ahead. We'll need to continue monitoring her closely." He paused, studying the kid's face. "You've done more for her than I can express. And for that, I thank you." The kid looked at him then, his expression unreadable. "I didn't do it for you," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do it for anyone but her." The doctor nodded, understanding the kid's words. "I know. But sometimes, doing something for someone else is the hardest thing you'll ever do. And you've shown a lot of strength. More than most people could handle." There was a long pause, the air thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts. The kid shifted his weight, finally speaking again. "My mom, she didn't make it. She was just like this baby. I couldn't save her, but I can save this one." His voice cracked slightly, but he held it together. The doctor's heart tightened at the kid's words. It was clear now, the kid wasn't just fighting for the baby's life, he was fighting for something more. A chance to redeem the loss of his own mother, to prove that he could save someone, that he wasn't powerless. "We all have our losses," the doctor said gently, his tone softer now. "And sometimes, it feels like there's nothing we can do to make up for them. But I've learned, especially recently, that redemption doesn't always come in grand gestures. It comes in the small things, like showing up, like staying when you want to walk away. You've done that. You've shown up for this baby, and that's something." The kid was quiet for a moment, absorbing the doctor's words. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the door. "I'm going to sit with her," he said simply, his voice calm now. The doctor watched him go, the weight of their conversation settling in. There was so much more to this story than he could have ever imagined. The kid's journey wasn't over, and neither was his own. But today, there was peace. Today, they had both learned that redemption wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about choosing to keep going, even when the odds seemed impossible. Later that evening, as the hospital grew quiet and the lights dimmed, the doctor sat alone in his office. He reflected on the events of the past few days, on the baby's struggle, on the kid's unwavering dedication, and on his own decisions. It had been a difficult journey, one filled with moments of doubt and fear. But it had also been a journey of healing, not just for the baby, but for all of them. As the doctor stood up, ready to leave for the night, he glanced out the window and saw the kid sitting by the baby's side, watching over her as if she were his own. The doctor smiled softly, a sense of peace finally settling within him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more moments of uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. In the end, it wasn't the big, heroic acts that mattered. It was the quiet moments of sacrifice, the willingness to keep going when it would be easier to stop. It was the power of doing what's right, even when the future is uncertain. The doctor left the hospital that night, knowing that he had done the best he could. He had made mistakes, but he had also made a choice to do better. And that, he realized, was the most important thing of all.